All right, so let's get cozy. Tonight, we're all about mulled wine.
Perfect for a chilly evening, right?
Absolutely. And we've got a really interesting mix of sources lined up. Historical accounts, modern recipes, even a look at how different cultures have embraced this drink. It's more than just a recipe, it's a whole tradition.
Yeah, it's fascinating. A seemingly simple drink with such a long history and global reach.
Exactly. So our mission tonight is to uncover not just the how-to of making mulled wine, but the why. Why has it captivated people for centuries, and why does it hold such a special place in so many cultures?
And trust me, there are some surprises along the way.
Oh, I bet. Like, have you ever heard of a mulled wine with a flaming sugarloaf?
Ah, yes. The Feuerzangen bowl. Quite the spectacle. But we'll get to that later.
Okay, save the best for last. I like it.
First, we need to go back to the beginning, back to ancient Rome.
The Romans and their wine. I could already picture the
Yeah.
togas and the goblets.
Indeed. Wine was a staple in Roman society, and there's evidence suggesting they were already heating and spicing their wine.
Makes sense, right? I mean, maybe it was a way to preserve it, or maybe just to warm themselves up on colder days.
You're thinking along the right lines. Both preservation and warmth were likely factors. Adding spices and heat, could help make that wine last longer. And a warm drink. Well, that would be welcome in a chilly Roman villa for sure.
Practical and enjoyable. A winning combination. And knowing the Romans, they probably spread this tradition as they expanded their empire.
Exactly. As Roman influence spread across Europe, so did their knowledge of viticulture,
Viticulture meaning.
the cultivation and harvesting of grapes, for winemaking. This basically laid the groundwork for mulled wine's future popularity.
So the seeds were sown, so to speak. All right, let's jump ahead a few centuries. Where are we off to next?
Let's go to 1390 England,
Mhm.
where we find a cookbook called The Form of Curie.
The Form of Curie. Interesting name.
It's one of the oldest surviving English cookbooks, and in its pages we find a detailed recipe for mulled wine.
A medieval recipe. That's something I gotta hear. What spices did they use back then?
Get ready for a mouthful. Cinnamon, ginger, cloves, long pepper, nutmeg, marjoram, cardamom, and grains of paradise.
Wow, that's a lot.
Oh, and they also included something called spikenard de Spain.
Spikenard de Spain. Sounds very fancy.
Right, so it seems medieval palates weren't afraid of big, bold flavors.
I guess not. And some of those spices, like grains in paradise, aren't that common today.
True. The use of grains of paradise, which is a West African spice, speaks volumes about medieval trade routes, their adventurous spirit when it came to flavor. It's a glimpse into a world of tastes, very different from our own.
Yeah, I can imagine. It really makes you think about how tastes have evolved, over time. All right, well, let's jump ahead again. Where to now?
Let's fast forward to Victorian Britain, to the esteemed Mrs. Beeton.
Mrs. Beeton, her cookbook's a classic. I'm curious to know her take on mulled wine.
Oh, of course she has a recipe. Any proper Victorian cookbook would.
Right.
But what's interesting is the level of formality and the specificity of her instructions. It's such a contrast to today's more casual approach. Like, she even includes very detailed instructions on cleaning the pot.
That's so Victorian. Everything had its proper place and procedure, though a clean pot's never a bad thing, of course.
Of course not.
Speaking of Victorian times, I read about a lost mulled wine recipe from that era, something called smoking bishop.
Ah, yes, the elusive smoking bishop. It's even mentioned in Dickens, A Christmas Carol.
Oh,
Sadly, the exact recipe seems lost to time.
makes you wonder how many other culinary treasures have just faded away over the years. But let's get back to the present day. What's mulled wine like in modern Britain?
Well, these days recipes are much more flexible. There's a lot of personal preference involved.
I like that, yeah.
The core spices are still there, orange, lemon, cinnamon, nutmeg. But you might also find things like fennel seed, star anise, cloves, cardamom, ginger.
So there's definitely room for creativity for experimenting.
Absolutely. And to cater to our modern need for convenience,
Oh, yeah.
you can even find pre-made spice bags for mulled wine.
Oh, wow, really?
Some people even just buy ready-made versions, straight from the store.
I guess that's tempting. But I bet nothing beats the aroma of homemade mulled wine simmering on the stove.
I'd have to agree with you there.
Okay, good. So we've covered ancient Rome, medieval England, modern Britain. But let's not forget that mulled wine isn't just a British tradition.
Right.
It's time to explore how other cultures have really made this drink their own. So let's head to the heart of Europe, to Germany and Austria, the land of
Glühwein.
I love that name. It sounds so warm and inviting. I believe it translates to glowing wine or smoldering wine, right?
That's exactly right. It captures that feeling you get when you take a sip, that comforting warmth.
It's so evocative. So what makes Glühwein different from other mulled wines?
Well, the base is typically red wine. It's heated with cinnamon sticks, cloves, star aniseed, orange slices, sugar,
Okay.
and sometimes vanilla pods. It creates the symphony of aromas that really fills the air, especially in German Christmas markets.
Oh, I can almost smell it now. And I've heard there's a version with rum, too.
Yes, mit Schuss, literally, with a shot. A little extra warmth for those chilly nights. And speaking of history, did you know the oldest documented Glühwein tankard belonged to a German count from the 1400s?
Wow. A 15th century Glühwein vessel. That's a piece of history I'd love to see. Speaking of historical Glühwein, you mentioned earlier a variation with a flaming sugarloaf. I'm ready for the grand reveal.
Ah, yes. The Vorzangenbowl. Imagine this. You have your steaming Glühwein,
Okay.
and then a rum-soaked sugarloaf is set on fire above it,
Whoa.
dripping its caramelized goodness into the drink. It's quite a dramatic presentation.
That sounds incredible. Definitely a drink for a special occasion.
Uh,
All right, so we've covered ancient Rome, medieval England, Victorian and modern Britain, and now Germany. Where to next on our global mulled wine adventure?
let's head north to Scandinavia, home of Glögg.
Glug. It just sounds cozy. And I've seen it spelled a few different ways. Is there a difference?
You're very observant. Glögg is the Swedish and Icelandic spelling. You'll also see glögg in Norwegian, Danish, and Faroes, and glögi in Finnish and Estonian.
So many variations. But at its core, is it all basically the same drink?
At its heart, yes, warm spiced wine. But each region does have its own twist.
I see.
Nordic glögg usually has spices like cinnamon, cardamom, ginger, cloves, and a touch of bitter orange.
Bitter orange. That's a new one. And what about the alcohol base? Is it always red wine?
Red wine is the most common, but you'll also find glögg made with white wine, port, Madeira, even stronger spirits like vodka, aquavit, rum, or brandy.
So there's a glug for everyone. It seems like a pretty popular drink in Scandinavia. Is there a particular time of year it's most enjoyed?
Glögg is really associated with Christmas celebrations throughout Scandinavia.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
It's a staple at holiday gatherings, Christmas markets, often served alongside those traditional treats like ginger biscuits and lustbiller, the saffron buns.
Right, right. It sounds like glögg is really tied into Scandinavian culture. And it seems like there's a version for everyone.
You got it. They even have non-alcoholic versions made with fruit juices, so everyone can take part.
That's great. It's amazing how one drink can have so many variations. Before we move on, I know we've been focusing on Europe, but is mulled wine popular in other parts of the world?
Absolutely. Mulled wine has gone global. You see it in Croatia and nearby countries where it's called Cujano vino.
Cuvano vino.
There's also Quentão in Brazil, often enjoyed during their winter festival, Festa Junina. And in Chile, you have Candola and Vino Navego.
Wow. So many different names, so many different traditions.
Right. We also find it in the Netherlands and Belgium where it's called Bischofswijn. It's tied to their Sinterklaas celebrations. And then there's Poland where it's Gerzijn Wino. And they often have vodka-spiked versions in their Christmas markets.
This is blowing my mind. I had no idea mulled wine was so widespread. It really shows the power of a simple, comforting drink to just transcend borders.
I completely agree. And we haven't even touched on all the countries where it's enjoyed, but one thing's clear. This beverage has a rich and fascinating history.
This has been an incredible journey so far. I'm loving this exploration.
Me too. It's been fascinating. Tracing the evolution of this drink and how it's taken on different forms over time across different cultures.
And we've only just scratched the surface. I'm so eager to hear what other insights you've gathered about this globally beloved beverage. What stands out to you the most as we look back on our mulled wine adventure so far?
What really fascinates me is just how adaptable mulled wine is.
Adaptable? How so?
Well, think about his journey. From a potentially practical drink in ancient Rome to this festive tradition with countless variations. Its evolution mirrors the shifts in our cultural tastes, our lifestyles, throughout history. And it's so interesting to see how each culture has put their own stamp on it, from the spice blends to the alcohol they prefer.
It is. Speaking of those cultural influences, it's a bit sad to think about those lost variations, like the smoking bishop.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder why some drinks gain popularity while others just fade away.
That's a great question. It makes you think about how food and drink trends evolve in general. What drives those shifts in popularity?
Yeah, it does. But it also makes you appreciate the staying power of mulled wine. It's clearly a drink that holds a special place in our hearts, no matter where we come from.
Absolutely. And as we sort of savor this moment, I think it's worth asking an even bigger question. Why does mulled wine, something so simple,
Right.
hold such a strong appeal across centuries and cultures?
It is a good question. It's basically just spiced, heated wine, but there's something about it that feels special, almost ritualistic.
Exactly. It seems to tap into something deeper, something about our shared human experience.
Yeah, it's more than just the ingredients.
It's the warmth, isn't it? Both literally and figuratively.
Right.
On a cold night, there's nothing quite like a steaming mug of mulled wine. Warms you right up, from the inside out.
Totally agree. And the spices themselves, they evoke this sense of history, tradition.
hmm
We're using ingredients, techniques that have been passed down for generations.
And don't forget the aroma. Fills the air with that festive feeling, or maybe just a cozy wintry vibe. Instant mood booster.
Absolutely. The aroma alone can just transport you. And it's a full sensory experience, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Sight, smell, taste, even touch, that warm mug in your hand. And it's a drink meant to be shared.
Exactly. Mulled wine brings people together, Christmas markets with friends, a family gathering, cozying up by the fire with loved ones. It creates this sense of community, of shared enjoyment. And I think that's a big part of its appeal. It goes beyond individual preferences and kind of unites us in that common experience.
I love that. It's like a warm hug in a mug,
Yeah,
shared across generations, across cultures.
beautifully put. So, as you're enjoying your next cup of mulled wine, I encourage you to think about what it means to you. Why does it hold such a special place for us? What stories, traditions does it bring to mind?
It's a beautiful thought to leave our listeners with. And for those who are feeling adventurous, maybe try recreating that lost Victorian recipe, smoking bishop. Who knows, that we could rediscover a forgotten treasure.
I love that idea, a smoking bishop revival. It speaks to how food and drink trends kind of come full circle, what's old is new again.
It's so true. All right, well, I think we've successfully uncovered the mysteries of mulled wine. Well, as many as we could fit in anyway. We've covered a lot of ground, from ancient Rome to modern Scandinavia.
We have. It's been amazing to see how this one simple drink has become a cherished tradition in so many different places. We've explored its humble origins, delved into a bunch of different recipes, even examined the cultural significance of this warm, comforting beverage.
And we've seen how mulled wine reflects how our tastes and lifestyles have changed, adapting to different times and places while still holding on to its charm.
Exactly. It's a drink that embodies warmth, hospitality, connection.
As we wrap up our exploration of mulled wine, I hope you, our listener, feel inspired to embrace all those traditions, old and new, the things that make this drink so special.
So grab your favorite mug, gather your loved ones, and just savor those flavors of history, of togetherness.
And remember, as you enjoy your next cup, you're taking part in a tradition that spans centuries and continents. It's a beautiful reminder that some things, like the simple pleasure of a warm spiced drink, really do stand the test of time.
Cheers to that.
Cheers. Until next time, happy sipping.